Hello friends, this is Worm, apologies for Saturday, and today I wanted to talk about Stasis and why Stasis is weak and what Bungie can potentially do to fix it. Now, we've talked about this before on the channel, this is nothing new here, and the reason why I sparked, this topic sparked interest to me is because of course we got a horror story, which you're seeing on screen here, and I got a role that I had been looking for on just a weapon in general, and this season they've added this one, this particular role on Unending Tempest, as well as Horror Story here. And of course, Horror Story, in my opinion, fills the role better. But the role you're seeing is Demolitionist and Headstone, right? Fantastic for Stasis Titan, or is it, right? So, but that's what sparked my interest, because I'm going in this strike, and I was using it a little bit yesterday, used it a little bit earlier today, and Stasis is just not feeling good, man. It is not feeling good at all, and it's a shame, because Stasis at one point, it was busted, of course, but at one point it really did feel viable. And then, we got the whole nerf to elemental shards, giving you the armor charger, whatever that system was. They moved away from that, and now we have it where like every 5th shard, stasis shard particularly, will give you an armor charge, blah blah blah. But even with that system, it still felt pretty good, but it received some nerfs. And I want to just kind of talk about those, I guess, nerfs today, talk about some ways Bungie could potentially fix it. And we'll start with the realistic ideas, and then we'll kind of get crazier as it goes on. But let's get the elephant out of the room. The reason why Stasis does not feel very good is because Strand just all around feels better, right? Like if you need a ad clear or an ad control system, Strand can do it. Right, Strand Titan, Strand Warlock, Strand Hunter, versus on Stasis you've got Stasis Warlock that can do ad control pretty well, but Stasis Hunter and Stasis Titan can't do ad control nearly as well. But not only that, you have some incredible buffs. You got Woven Mail, you've got built-in healing and stuff with Banner of War, and I am of course thinking particularly of Titan. So if I say something and you're like, well, that doesn't apply to the class I play, I do apologize. I've been stuck on Titan for the past, for the past few days or something. At any rate, Strand does everything that Stasis does better, right? And so, like, I want to point that out. This is not going to be a video talking about how we should nerf Strand. This is a video talking about how we should buff Stasis so that it can compete with Strand. So there's a reason to say, hey, I'm going to use Stasis as opposed to Strand, right? Now, the first thing, and I think this is one of the biggest issues that Stasis has, it has no player buffs, right? So like, think about it, like every other subclass in the game, Strand has Woven Mail, Solar has Radiance and Restoration, Void has Overshield, Invis, Devour, Arc has Amplified. Like every other subclass in the game has a buff, a player buff associated with it, and Stasis doesn't. Like the closest you get to Stasis is actually one of the fragments I'm using here, where you will get an Overshield for picking up a tiny bit of Overshield for picking up a Stasis shard, right? That, in my opinion, is one of the biggest weaknesses that Stasis has. And of course, Stasis was the first and the original like 3.0 style subclass, right? It's the first subclass to come with the aspect and fragment system. And so I think that, it's not like Bungie maliciously like was out like, oh, let's not give it any buffs or anything like that. But it kind of got left in the dust. We got the light 3.0 starting with Void, and Bungie went with the buffs, Invis, Void Overshield, Devour, stuff like that. Then Solar came out, we had Restoration and Cure and Radiance and all that stuff. And Stasis just kind of got left in the dust, man. And that is a huge deal, because think about your builds that you use. Think about your Strand builds, your Solar builds, your Arc builds, like all that stuff. How much are you building into things like Radiance or Restoration, right? Like I know me, across all my characters, I'm heavily building into Restoration if I'm on Solar. I'm heavily building into Woven Mail if I'm on Strand, and this is across all 3 characters, right? And so Stasis doesn't have any of that to build into it. Yeah, you can slow and freeze, but again, like if you freeze an enemy, what is the difference between freezing an enemy and suspending them? Outside of the fact that, they stay frozen for longer than they do if they're suspended, right? There's really not much going for Stasis, right? And one of the travesties, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the video, is you even deal less damage with heavy and primary ammo weapons to targets that are frozen, right? And that's a travesty, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But you know, there's no associated buff with stasis, and I think that that's something that does need to change. Now, I'm going to leave the speculation as to what Bungie could potentially do in terms of a player buff for stasis up to maybe you guys in the comments or up to Bungie, right? I'm not totally creative on that. Like, I don't know of anything that would kind of fit the theme of of stasis very well. You know, that could be a buff, so to speak, a player buff. But that's the first and foremost thing. That's one of the biggest reasons why I think stasis is just, it's fallen behind, right? But let's move on to the second reason here, and that is the fact that stasis got a major nerf to, I believe it's Whisper of Ryme. Okay, and we talked about this, or alluded to this earlier in the video, but you know, one of the fragments allows you to pick up stasis shards, sorry, and you get overshield, you get health back, stuff like that. That was a problem in the Crucible, and so Bungie really hit it hard in both PvE and PvP. And this is one of those times when I look at Bungie and I shake my head. I'm like, seriously? Like, seriously, Bungie? Like, you nerfed it in PvE and PvP. Stasis, at one point, Stasis Titan could be viable. Like, you could spam, you know, as you see in the background here, which I'm just doing regular strikes because Grenadier was active, so I'm getting faster grenade recharge rate. But you could spam your grenades and your Icefall, your Hoarfrost Barricade and your Howl of the Storm, and you could make enough shards to be constantly replenishing energy and constantly getting that overshield. Like, the survivability was there at one point. Then Bungie went and they changed it because of PvP, right? And not just because of PvP, but a specific small group of people in PvP that were using, you know, triple stasis Titans with Cerberus +1, blah, 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 blah. And so now it is, I wouldn't even say it's a shell of its former self. Like, it is a dust fragment of its former self. Like, you're going to see, I don't know if it's in this gameplay actually, but if you get on and you try to build into this, you know, this Whisper of Ryme, where the only healing you realistically have is through, you know, these stasis shards, like, you're going to be suffering tremendously. And of course, stasis shards, they're not like ionic traces that'll track you down from across the map. Like, you have to either walk over them and pick them up, or you have to have a fragment on that will allow them to suck towards you once you get within like 10 meters, which is still like close, right? That is putting you at substantial risk. That is putting you at substantial risk of dying when you have, you know, ionic traces that will literally just come straight to you. You know, void breaches and solar, what are they, fire sprites? I don't really see those being used very much in my gameplay and in other people I watch gameplay. Like, I don't see people building too much into those. But of course, with stasis shards, these are frequently built into. In fact, anytime I see somebody using stasis, they are using one of the harvest fragments. I'm sorry, aspects, so that they can get stasis shards. And the stasis shards, like, yes, you're generating a lot of them. It's not nearly enough to keep you alive. Like, it's nowhere near enough to keep you alive, right? And that's one of the biggest issues, again, with stasis, is the fact they took that away from us. Because on Warlock, I had a build where I could stay alive because of stasis shards. On Titan, I had a build where I could stay alive because of stasis shards. But when they took that away, I mean, you can't, the survivability is just not there. Every other subclass in the game, right? Every other subclass has survivability built into it. Void, you have Devour, right? Arc, you have, you know, like things like Knockout. For example, Knockout on Titan, you know, the ionic traces for Warlock grant you your rift faster. You know, you have there's a Hunter melee that gives you health back. Like, you have survivability, you have restoration and cure on all your solar. Like I said, you have Devour on Void, on Strand. Sorry, you have Banner of War, which granted the other classes, I guess, don't have as much survivability, but at the same time, they have Woven Mail, which is a big deal. But Stasis doesn't have any of that. Like, you don't have healing. Like, the most healing you get through Stasis, right, is through through this Whisper of Ryme fragment that has been just substantially nerfed. I mean, you can watch on screen here, you know, I'm sure at some point I'm going to take damage and you'll be able to see how much health you get back. You don't get back like hardly any health at all. Like, especially in high level content, that health that you're replenishing is gone nearly instantly, right? And so, like, that's a big issue with Stasis as well, is that Whisper of Ryme, the only real survivability you had, is now gone. And not only that, but I don't know why they haven't in this is just side note here, but you know, I don't remember the name of the fragment, but one of the fragments that gives you damage resist when you're near a frozen target or a stasis crystal, like the damage resist you get is like 10 or 15%. Like it's nothing. Right. And I feel like it should at least give you resist ×2, which I think is 30%. Right. Like it should at least give you a pretty substantial amount of time, because the crystals, they don't last forever. Like it's not like you make a crystal and all of a sudden you can build an ice fort and they just stay up forever. Like the crystals do disappear eventually. But yeah, those are probably, in my opinion, those are the main gripes that I have about Stasis. Oh, you know what? Actually, there's one more. Now, I don't have any extensive testing behind this. But when Stasis first launched, Bungie said that Stasis abilities have longer cooldowns. In fact, it still says that darkness-based, darkness subclass abilities have longer cooldowns. Now, I don't know about y'all, but the Strand grenades, they cool down very, very quickly, even without threat of generation, right? They cool down very quickly. Stasis, I don't know if they've changed it, but if they haven't changed it, they need to remove that penalty that you get. Like it's like Stasis grenade, like a glacier grenade, nowhere near as good as some of the Strand grenades, like a shackle grenade, or the grapple grenade, or healing grenade on solar. Like glacier grenades, they have a place, don't get me wrong, they have a place, but that place is not as strong as other, what these other grenades do in terms of utility, right? So if they haven't reduced those cooldowns need to be reverted, right? But anyways, let's move on from there. That's the complaints I have with Stasis. That's why I think Stasis feels so weak in Destiny 2 currently. You can tell me your thoughts in the comments on it, but let's talk about what Bungie can do to fix it, again with the kind of realistic stuff first. Number one, okay, one of the biggest ones, just right off the top of my head, change Whisper of Ryme back to its original state in PvE, right? It's like where it gave you what was it, 25, I think it was 25 overshield HP, and then it gave you like 30 health or something like that. I can't really remember what it was. Whatever they do, they need to change the healing you get through these stasis shards, right? Because again, even if you have the fragment where they track to you, that's not enough. Where it is currently is not enough to maintain survivability, right? And I think Bungie's hesitation on this is because, well, yes, like, you can freeze a lot of targets. You can make, or I'm sorry, not freeze a lot of targets. You can make a lot of stasis shards. I mean, you see in the background gameplay here, I'm making a ton of stasis shards, which granted, again, Grenadier is active, so my grenade's charging super fast, but you can really make a bunch of shards. I mean, one grenade makes 5 stasis shards. Right, so in the past, what was it, like 25 HP times 5 is 125 HP. Like, that's more than half of your health back just by one grenade, right? That's like a healing grenade on top of, a barricade at the same time, right? Because it blocks the damage, then you can break him, heal him, blah, 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 stuff like that. But I think that needs to be reverted in PvE, or at least change so that there's more healing involved in it, right? It's like, I get the overshield thing is maybe somewhat of a concern, because you don't want the overshield to step on Void 3.0's toes, right? Like, I don't want a situation where, like, oh, well, Stasis overshield and Void overshield, they're the same things, and, blah, blah, blah. Like, Void overshield should be fundamentally different somehow than Stasis overshield, and I'm really not opposed to it necessarily being, like, stronger than Stasis overshield. But at the same time, like, it's problematic because the amount of overshield you get is like, what is it, like 7? Or maybe it's 12. Maybe it's 12 overshield hit points. Again, in high level content, not even talking grandmasters, in higher level content, that is gone literally with 2 to 3 shots of like the weakest weapon in the game. Like a dreg shoots you twice and it's gone. Okay, like in grandmasters, you get shot once and your whole overshield is just gone. Like, that's kind of that's kind of weak. But mainly, I think the main thing is you need to give it some sort of more healing, right? Every time you pick up a stasis charge, you heal for 30 HP, and if you're at full health, then you can pick up 12, or whatever it is currently for your overshield, right? But the healing aspect needs to be present, because there's no survivability with stasis like whatsoever, right? So that's the first change that I would make. The second change that I would make, of course, and we kind of talked about this, but if Bungie still has stasis cooldowns on longer timers, that needs to be changed as well, right? But again, I don't know if that's the case. I haven't done extensive testing. So if you know about the testing for stasis grenades and stuff, if they're still longer, like tell me in the comments. Or if I'm wrong here and they're not longer, also tell me in the comments. But the next buff I think should happen to stasis. We just, man, I had one earlier and I forgot what it was because I was just lost in the day. But I think that also giving it some sort of not just healing, but also some sort of damage resistance. Because again, Stasis is a subclass that is about being right there in the fray, similar to Strand, right? Strand Titan, for example, like you're literally in the battlefield fighting, right? And yes, you have the fragment that allows you to have some damage resistance if you're standing near a frozen target or a stasis crystal, which that's good, but that's not nearly, again, that's not nearly enough. Like I feel like that should at least be like 30% DR. I would even say maybe 40 to 50% DR. Maybe not as much as Woven Mail, or actually, no, take that back. You know what? Never mind. Make that fragment when you're standing next to a frozen target or a stasis crystal, you get like 70 to 80% damage reduction, right? Because here's the primary difference between that fragment and Woven Mail, because people might ask, well, why would I even use Woven Mail if I'm going to get 80% damage reduction for standing near a stasis crystal? Again, those stasis crystals don't last forever, and you can't just move them with you. Like, you have to stand near them. If I freeze a target or if I throw a glacier grenade down or whatever, I have to be standing close to that crystal. And especially like if you're on Titan, Stasis Titan, and you're wanting to get those stasis shards, you have to destroy the crystals, right? So there's trade-offs here. Versus something like Strand where there's not really any trade-off like for doing anything, right? So I think that would be a really, really good thing they could do, is just changing that one fragment to give you incredibly good damage resistance while you're standing near a stasis crystal or a stasis target. Because also remember, enemies can also destroy your stasis crystal. So let's say you're using, a roll with headstone, like I'm using this auto rifle here. Roll with headstone, you kill an enemy, it makes a crystal, you're standing next to it, and there's a boss just hammering you with its, explosive or area of effect weapon. It's going to probably end up destroying that crystal, because enemies can also destroy stasis crystals. That's, again, a risk, right? So I think that the fragment that gives you that damage resistance, standing near a crystal or frozen target, needs to be increased. And I think that it should be more than Woven Mail. And because, again, one more time, because Woven Mail, you can take with you on the go. You can move anywhere you want with Woven Mail, and you got that 60% damage resistance. But if you're using Stasis, that's a trade-off. You get more damage resistance, but also you have to stay in a certain spot. And to me, Stasis definitely feels like a less mobile, like Strand feels like a mobile subclass. All the other, with the exception of Void, maybe feel like mobile subclasses, but Void and Stasis feel like, like defensive almost, I guess is the way I'm trying to put that. But yeah, that would be some really strong changes in that front. Now I kind of want to move into some changes that I guess are a little bit more crazy. But number one, buffing up the grenades, man, yes, they're good-ish. I think a glacier grenade actually is technically the grenade that does the most damage in the game, because if you throw it right at a boss's feet and it shatters all those crystals, that's a lot of damage. But at the same time, the grenades are kind of lackluster, right? Like if you're not building into the grenades, not using Osmomancy Warlock, for example, or the Duskfield grenade, what is it? The Duskfield exotic for Hunter, like the grenades, they kind of feel lackluster. And I think that Bungie could just do something else to improve that, like in a Duskfield, for example, a Duskfield, make the radius of effect a little bit bigger, right? Doesn't have to be a whole lot bigger, but just a little bit bigger would be nice. Like give it like base touch of winter size, right? In PvE again. And I don't know if Bungie can separate the actual size of grenades between PvE and PvP, but I think that would be a great aspect to have for it. Give cold snaps the ability to, like every time you throw a cold snap, it sends out 3 seekers that will freeze targets, right? That way Osmomancy builds would, turn up to 11, right? But even regular, like if I'm a Titan wanting to use cold snap, it now makes more sense, because now I can freeze up to 3 enemies. And it's different because, again, the separation between Strand and Stasis, right? A shackle grenade, as long as there's enemies within the radius of that grenade, it can get all of them, right? Like if they're all in close enough proximity, you can freeze like 20 enemies at once, theoretically, of course, theoretically. But with this, you could only, I mean, technically you could potentially freeze 20 enemies if they're all, you know, really tight little groups, but it's not as realistic, right? You know, you throw it down, you're typically going to freeze maybe 3 or 4 enemies, and the 4 is going to come if 2 enemies are close, very close to each other, right? So I think that would be a pretty fair trade-off. And then the Glacier Grenade, I think it would be so cool if Bungie gave the ability for the Glacier Grenade to have different shapes, right? So obviously currently the Glacier Grenade, it does this just flat wall of 5 stasis crystals, right? What if Bungie allowed you to edit the shape of that, so that instead of just doing in a line, you could maybe have like a kind of like a little like an arc, right? That way you can put it down in front of you, and now instead of just protecting directly in front of you, it almost gives you a little bit of a like a round barrier. Let me where is it? There it is, like a round barrier in front of you, right? Or you could do, you know, instead of doing that, you could do a star-shaped one where there's one in the middle, you know, one like right in the middle, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it's kind of like a let me see if I can do the fingertips there. There we go, like a shape like that. You know, that way the crystals are spread a little bit more apart, but also because they're spread a little bit more apart, that puts you more at a risk. Like you can't just block straight damage coming at you, right? But it also allows for a larger area of effect. Like I think that would be such a cool feature to have with stasis grenades, and just give stasis grenades just different types of functionality, or at least the Glacier Grenade. I don't really know how you could do different functionality for the other grenades, but stasis, you know, with the Glacier Grenade, I think that you could have those other shapes, and that would be a really, really fun thing that Bungie could do. You know, put on armamentarium, throw one right in front of you, throw one right behind you, boom, you have a circle of 10 crystals around you. Then you can pick up your ally and boom, then, you know, destroy one of the crystals, make sure the escape is clear, and then go, right? I don't know, like we're kind of having fun here. But that, I feel like that's some ways that Bungie could potentially make it better that are really unlikely to happen, but would be fun. And then of course we finally get to like the absolutely crazy like Fortnite aspect of it. And like, I just had this idea, what if with stasis crystals, like you could, like stasis crystals, number one, they didn't decay for a substantial amount of time, or as long as you're close to a stasis crystal, it doesn't go away, right? Unless it's broken by, you know, an enemy or yourself. Imagine the potential you could have to stick glacier grenades to each other, right? So like, you know, you throw a glacier grenade, it's on the ground, then you could throw another one right next to it, and then it makes a little shelf up there. So you could go underneath it and hide from whatever's coming down on top of you, or you could jump on top of it, and now you have high ground, right? Because you're standing on stasis crystals. Because of course, stasis crystals, man, they can stick on various objects. You know, they can provide an element of, you know, utility where you can get to places that wouldn't normally, you wouldn't normally be able to get to. And we've seen clips on YouTube and TikTok and stuff of people doing this. You know, they throw a glacier grenade up at the wall and it makes crystals, and they climb on the crystals and get some crispy snipe over a place that you really shouldn't be able to get to. Like, I mean, I can understand Bungie's hesitation with PvP and that happening, but man, that would be so cool in PvP, right? Like, you know, you see me using Salvation's grip here, right? Using Salvation's grip, you do that little spread of crystals right in front of you, then you throw another grenade, you know, one of those kind of rounded grenades like we talked about, like here. Then all of a sudden you have a field of all these stasis crystals. You know, use Cryoclasm, just shatter them all, just absolutely nuke, you know, a mini boss or something that's stuck inside of something like that. I don't know. I think that would be, again, that's way out there just in terms of thoughts, but I think that would be such a cool aspect to have, like such a cool ability to literally build forts with stasis. But yeah, I don't know. We've kind of talked long enough about stasis. You know, these are just some of the changes I noticed that make stasis bad, or not. I shouldn't say bad, but make stasis feel not as viable as other subclasses. In fact, for me personally, there's only one viable stasis subclass or stasis build in the game currently, and that's the Osmiomancy Warlock. And I'm sure y'all could probably come up with other builds that are, well, this is pretty good, this is good, but like in terms of like, would you take it into a Grandmaster over X build? The only one I can think of is Osmiomancy Warlock, and that relies on a very specific exotic and a very specific build in general. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Of course, if you liked today's video, drop a like, it helps the channel out a lot. Subscribe so that you can become a part of our daily content and conversations. And yeah, that's it for me, guys. I'll see y'all next time. Bye for now.